where we unpack complex ideas and really try to find those surprising nuggets of knowledge. Today, we're taking a truly microscopic look at something we might think we understand pretty well, art. Specifically, the revolutionary paintings of Édouard Manet. You've shared some incredible material with us, really digging into Manet's painting experiments. And our mission for this deep dive, I guess, is to dissect how Manet deliberately created what our sources are calling ruptures and dislocations on his canvases, things that fundamentally change the relationship between you, the viewer, and the artwork itself. Think of it as a journey into how paintings can actively, manipulate and even provoke your gaze.
Yeah, and what's truly fascinating here, I think, is how this really goes beyond just art history. It touches on perception itself. We're exploring this detailed four-step research framework, which is quite interesting. It lets us trace Manet's visual strategies right back to their sociocultural, even personal roots. So like you said, it isn't just about looking at paintings. It's about understanding how Manet literally built a viewing fracture right into the canvas. He made looking a different kind of experience entirely.
Okay, a viewing fracture. Let's unpack this. We'll be looking at specific works, right? Like Olympia, the Déjeuner sur l'herbe, and the bar at the Folies Bergère, to see these ideas really in action. Because you might just assume you passively look at a painting, but Manet, he seems to have made viewing an active event, not just some simple process. So where do we start? How do we begin to dissect these ruptures and dislocations that Manet apparently so deliberately placed? Our sources lay out this clear four-step methodology. What's the first step in this, fascinating approach?
Right. It begins with what the research calls a same-domain dialogue between text and image, which sounds complicated, but essentially we start by collecting every kind of text resource imaginable that relates to Manet. So, his own letters, any studio notes we have, Salon critiques from his era, newspaper reviews. These give us pretty direct windows into his creative motivations and, crucially, the social context of his work.
Okay, so really digging into the conversations around Manet at the time, getting the contemporary buzz, so to speak.
Precisely. Then we bring in crucial philosophical insights. People like Michel Foucault, for instance. His famous lectures on Manet argued that Manet fundamentally altered the structural relationship between the canvas and the viewer. He changed how the painting itself related to the person looking at it. And we also draw on more recent academic work, T.J. Clarke, exploring Manet in class, Cheryl Evans's feminist perspective on the politics of gender and viewing. And of course, nowadays, vast digital archives give us these amazing high-resolution images and digitized critiques.
Wow, okay, that's a huge amount of material.
Yeah.
So how do you then connect all that, written analysis, the theory, to the actual paint on the canvas?
Well, once those diverse texts are gathered, the next big move is what the framework calls keyword identification. We essentially comb through all that text, looking for specific terms that kept popping up related to this viewing fracture idea. So think of words like exposed flatness, gaze tension, artificial light source, canvas self-referentiality, gaze exchange, things like that. And here's where modern tools come in handy. By feeding these texts into a special program, we could statistically map how often those terms appeared, and importantly, with what other words. This essentially built a kind of conceptual network of Manet's viewing strategies. It showed us the most prominent ideas surrounding his work at the time and since.
Ah, I see. So it's about identifying the language, the concepts critics and philosophers were actually using to describe Manet's effects. I noticed Foucault's terms often focus on destroying spatial consistency, while T.J. Clarke emphasized class nature, and Evans looked at the female subject's returning gaze. It's almost like a theoretical shadow guiding the visual reading, isn't it?
Exactly. And the final really critical part of this first step is image detail comparison. We map these vocabularies, these keywords, back onto specific paintings like Olympia or Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe. For instance, if a text mentions light fracture, we look for abrupt light-dark changes, like, that extreme contrast between the maid's black dress and the white bed sheet in Olympia.
Like that really jumps out.
It does. Or if gaze exchange comes up, we analyze how figures look at each other, or, maybe more importantly, how they might directly look out at the viewer, or even pointedly ignore them. And exposed flatness would lead us to examine if perspective and depth are somehow canceled, like the almost distanceless overlapping of the background bouquet and the maid in Olympia. The goal here is to create these word-image comparison plates, as the course calls them, to build a solid empirical foundation.
So it's like you're charting a map of viewing ruptures, where the text and the image are genuinely talking to each other. That's quite an innovative approach to start with. Okay, now where do we go from there? What's the next step in this methodology?
So the second step is what's called composition grid and visual node analysis. Think of it like this. We start by literally overlaying a grid, maybe a simple tic-tac-toe board, or sometimes more complex 4x4 grid onto Manet's paintings. This helps us see the layout of pictorial tension, not just broadly, but right down to the micro level. It helps pinpoint exactly where the visual pressure points are. Within each grid square, we then annotate the positions of figures, accessories, background objects, noting things like color saturation, brightness, contrast, how dense the forms are. This basically builds a visual weight distribution map.
Huh. I can see how that would expose some interesting things. Like in Olympia, you mentioned the contrast.
Yeah.
That extreme difference between the black maid's dress, sort of top left, and the white bed sheet, bottom right. That seems to create immediate tension, pulling your eye across.
Precisely. And this map reveals how Manet often broke traditional visual centrality. He pulled the viewer's gaze towards what you might call non-central zones. Corners, marginal figures, props even. This isn't just a stylistic choice, it feels like a deliberate disruption. Following that, we position visual nodes, primary ones like the nude figures or those frontal gazing eyes we talked about, and secondary ones like background details or fabric textures. We then measure their spatial distance and gaze angles to establish a gaze vector network. This network shows this hidden visual dynamism, constantly pulling the viewer in different, sometimes conflicting directions.
Like in Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe. I always find that one jarring. The conflicting gazes of the male figures who seem to be talking, and then the nude female just staring right at you.
Yeah.
It creates this triangular tension, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Makes it hard to find a single, comfortable focal point. Feels like your eyes are constantly being tugged around.
Yes, exactly. And that tugging is what the research calls structural resistance. Imagine a traditional painting being, perfectly composed, a sort of welcoming vista. Manet threw a wrench in that. He'd place his main figures right at the edge sometimes, or use flat light to collapse depth so background characters float almost like stickers, defying perspective. He even created visual caesuras, these jarring pauses like cropping feet right at the canvas edge, or making a figure stare pointedly outside the frame, dragging your attention away from the supposed central action.
So that's why his paintings can feel so unsettling.
Is it a deliberate difficultification of viewing then? It feels like you can't just smoothly scan the picture. You're constantly interrupted, forced to look back, almost made aware of the very act of viewing itself. Is that the idea? Absolutely. Which brings us very neatly to the third step, viewer gaze path simulation. To reconstruct how viewers actually move their eyes across these canvases, the research uses two main methods. The first is traditional hand-drawn gaze maps, where observers literally mark their first fixation point and then trace their eye movements on a printout of the painting. The second is digital simulation, using modern eye-tracking models and visual saliency algorithms, basically, computer programs that predict where people are most likely to look to predict these viewing hotspots.
So you're literally tracing the viewer's journey through the painting, either manually or with tech. Okay, what do these simulations reveal about Manet's approach then?
Well, they reveal Manet's deliberate viewing resistance points, these places where the eye snags. In Olympia, for example, your gaze typically starts maybe at the bouquet, moves to the black maid, and then maybe lands on Olympia's pale body and her direct gaze. But this flow is often abruptly interrupted by the sharp color changes, like at the boundary of the bedsheet and her body. It prevents a smooth slide. It's like hitting a sudden visual cliff. Or consider Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe again. That compositional asymmetry, two men conversing, one woman staring right at you. It makes it hard to establish a fixed viewing loop. And the bathing woman way in the background creates this depth confusion, kind of suspending your perception of distance.
It really sounds like the canvas is actively pushing back against your gaze. It's not inviting you in, necessarily.
It is, in a way. These resistance points force you, the viewer, to look back at the canvas itself, rather than getting lost in some kind of narrative illusion. The canvas stops being a transparent interface, like a window, and becomes what the sources call an alienating device. For the act of viewing it makes you aware of your own gaze. We then reconstruct these gaze flow diagrams using arrows to show movements, jumps, return points. In a bar at the Folies Bergère, for instance, viewers are obviously drawn to the barmaid first, but when they try to figure out the mirror's viewpoint, they discover this positional misalignment, this impossibility, which creates a real cognitive gap. This forces the gaze back to the edges, examining the separation between reality and reflection.
So it's not just a painting you passively look at. It actively engages you, almost like a puzzle or a visual problem to solve. How revolutionary was this cognitive gap for viewers back then who were maybe accustomed to more straightforward compositions?
Oh, extremely revolutionary. Manet arranges visual guides and obstacles between these notes we talked about, sometimes using diagonal objects to guide the gaze, other times using conflicting gazes to interrupt your expectations. This isn't just about changing the flow, it draws the viewer right into the visual and, importantly, the ethical dilemmas Manet creates. It's why the research insists viewing is an event, not a process. Traditional viewing is often seen as linear, from outside to in, you take it all in smoothly. But Manet, through these contradictions, makes viewing a series of instantaneous events, maybe even jolts. As Foucault put it, Manet made the canvas shift from a transparent window to an impenetrable surface. This deliberate blurring forces us to reconsider the history of how we viewed art, and even the ethical implications of that gaze. The viewer is no longer the passive master, but becomes a role manipulated and even countered from within the picture itself.
A gaze choreography. I like that. It fundamentally challenges that whole 19th century visual experience. But how did the public at the time actually react to this revolutionary approach? That must bring us to the fourth and final step, right? Counter-evidence interpretation of sociocultural context.
Yes, exactly. This step really highlights the external testimonies, if you like, of Manet's viewing fracture, particularly through how Salon audiences reacted. And while his paintings were frequently mocked and rejected, famously so, newspapers didn't just critique them, they savaged them. They published satirical cartoons literally mocking Olympia as obscene and unfinished. Imagine the Victorian equivalent of a viral meme, but aimed squarely at Art Manet, was clearly ruffling feathers. And these reactions weren't just about moral sensitivities, though that was part of it. They directly reflected the heterogeneous feel, the unsettling nature of the picture's viewing structure. For instance, the audience just couldn't accept the nude woman's direct frontal gaze in Olympia. It challenged the unspoken viewing contract of the time, where the viewer was supposed to be in control. Their mockery of his supposedly messy brushwork actually pointed, perhaps unconsciously, to his destruction of traditional chiaroscuro, that smooth light and shadow, and his pictorial decentralization.
Huh. So their very rejection of the paintings was, in a weird way, proof of Manet's success in creating this fracture. It's almost like their discomfort was exactly the point he was trying to make, or at least in effect he anticipated. Were there any specific critiques that really hammered home this idea of a fracture for you in the research?
Indeed. It showed that the very points of mockery were precisely the sites of rupture he was creating. Another key context here is the rise of photography. In Manet's time, daguerreotypes offered this amazing precision and stable composition, capturing a perfect moment of reality, very fixed. Manet's paintings, in contrast, deliberately refused this stable viewing. In the Déjeuner sur l'Herbe, for example, he avoids a clear timeline or a single frozen moment. As the source puts it. With elements like the distance dislocation of that bathing woman in the background, it's confusing. It's not a closed moment you just consume, it's a field of difficulty, plunging the viewer into contemplation, not just passive scanning.
That's a really crucial distinction. He wasn't just trying to capture reality like a camera. He was interrogating the very act of seeing it. What about the urban environment? Paris was changing rapidly then.
Absolutely vital. Urban cultural symbols are also key. The clothing, the props, the postures in his paintings are deeply rooted in modern Parisian life. Take the bouquet, the lace shawl, the black maid in Olympia, for example. These all symbolize aspects of upper-class consumer desire and social structures of the time. These aren't just background decorations. The research argues they're, quote, triggering mechanisms for viewing fractures. They actively contribute to the unsettling effect. The bouquet, likely a gift from a male visitor, intersects with Olympia's gaze, creating this complex field of multiple tensions involving viewing, class, gender, even race. And Manet's depictions of public spaces like bars, as in a bar at the Folies Bergère, echo the breaking down of viewing divisions between private and public, male and female spheres, turning the canvas into a kind of social microcosm of urban modernity.
So he wasn't just breaking artistic rules in isolation. He was commenting on and actively challenging the social and cultural codes of his time through how he constructed the viewing experience in his work.
Exactly. Through challenging Salon reactions, contrasting with the stable perspective of photography, and using this dramatic collage of urban symbols, Manet reshaped not just pictorial form, but also the very underlying assumptions of how we view things. Viewing, in his context, ceased to be just a comfortable aesthetic experience. It became, you could argue, an ethical experiment, forcing confrontation with social contradictions and the inherent manipulation in looking. His painting experiment constructed counter-evidence, as the source says, against the established viewing institution of the time, making the picture itself a site of confrontation. And this shows us, ultimately, that viewing isn't just a technical act of optics, but a complex historical, social, and psychological intersection that Manet brilliantly made visible.
Wow. That's an incredible framework for understanding his work. It's definitely given me a whole new lens to look through. Now, to help our listeners really grasp these concepts, our sources offer something called a fracture lexicon, almost like a quick guide to some of these key terms. Could you walk us through those briefly?
Of course, happy to. The first concept they highlight is visual gap, écart visuel. These are basically areas in the picture where your gaze cannot pass smoothly. They're caused by things like abrupt light-shadow changes, compositional obstructions, or maybe a subject's gaze interrupting your natural flow. Think of it like a visual speed bump for your eyes, something that makes you stop or stumble.
Okay, got it. A visual gap is a break in the visual continuity. Makes sense. What's next?
Next is gaze splintering, éclatement du regard. This one is a bit more psychological. It refers to the instability and maybe the psychological tearing you might feel when gazing at a subject, especially due to ethical tensions present in the painting, like the nudity, class differences, or racial elements we've discussed. So it's not just a visual interruption, but an emotional or cognitive one. It makes you feel something perhaps uncomfortable.
Right, that makes perfect sense, especially with works like Olympia, where that direct gaze combined with the context could absolutely provoke discomfort or challenge the viewer's assumptions. And the third term?
The third is field reconstruction, reconstruction du champ. This describes how Manet redefined the viewing positions and the relationships within the canvas by actively breaking traditional spatial perspective, canceling background depth sometimes, and blurring figure boundaries. He's essentially rebuilding the visual field in a new, often unsettling way, taking it apart and putting it back together differently.
Fascinating. So, okay, we have visual gap, gaze splintering, and field reconstruction. How can our listeners maybe apply these ideas themselves and truly experience this viewing fracture when they look at a Manet or maybe even other art?
Well, the source actually suggests a great little thinking exercise. Choose any pictorial detail in Olympia, say. Then map it to one of these fracture lexicon terms. Try to pinpoint how it actually manifests in the picture. For example, is a visual gap embodied in that compositional cut between the bouquet and the maid? Does gaze splintering appear in the nude woman's direct, maybe confrontational, gaze at you, the viewer? You could even mark these points on an image reproduction, or simply just note your own emotional reactions while viewing maybe embarrassment, resistance, feeling kind of violated, or just noticing your gaze wandering uncomfortably.
That's a brilliant way to make it personal and really bring these concepts to life. And the ultimate goal isn't to find a single right answer, is it? It's more about the process.
Not at all. There's no single correct interpretation here. The purpose of this exercise is really to shift your mindset, to make you aware that viewing isn't just a natural instinct or a passive act of taking things in. It's a dynamic structure, constantly being shaped by the pictorial design itself, by the cultural context surrounding it, and, importantly, by your own personal experience and biases you bring to it. It kind of provides an operating manual for how to really look at these works, to engage with them on a deeper level.
So wrapping this up, what does this all mean for us today? We've delved pretty deep into how Manet's radical approach from, his specific brushstrokes to his unsettling compositions and the whole cultural context of his time really transformed the act of viewing. He shifted the canvas from being just a transparent window onto a scene to what our sources compellingly call a viewing apparatus or even a visual machine.
Yeah, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, Manet's work wasn't just about painting differently. It was a fundamental challenge to the entire 19th century visual experience and how people understood subjective perception. He turned the viewer from this passive, maybe voyeuristic observer into an active participant, someone manipulated and even countered by the picture itself. The viewing fracture isn't just an artistic style. It's really a profound reevaluation, a rehistoricization, and maybe even a re-ethicization of how we engage with images. It gives them new weight.
And this raises a really important question for you, our listener, I think. As you go about your day, encountering just countless images on screens, in ads, scrolling through feeds, even in museums, how often are you truly aware of the forces at play? The forces pulling your gaze, creating these visual gaps, or maybe even splintering your perception in subtle ways. Manet designed this tension deliberately, very consciously. But in our modern, image-saturated world, is viewing still just a natural instinct for us? Or is it always a dynamic structure, constantly being constituted by design, by context, and by our own experience? Perhaps Manet's gaze choreography, as we called it, continues to shape how we see even today, often without us realizing it.
Precisely. His work makes visible how viewing is never merely a technical act. It's always a complex historical, social, and psychological intersection. So next time you encounter an image, any image, maybe pause and consider. Is it just a transparent window, or is it perhaps a machine actively shaping your gaze?
That's a powerful thought to end on. Thanks for diving deep with us today. Until next time, keep looking closer.